Hi, I'm Jon Miller. I'm a GT racer in IMSA, SRO, at the Nürburgring, Creventic races, Asian Le Mans, all over the world. I also coach in the Ferrari Challenge Series, both in the US and abroad. We're here today at CXC's headquarters in the Motion Pro 2 simulator, and today's lessons will apply to any simulator, but especially to those who are CXC owners. First things first, you want to have a nice high quality setup. Now what does that mean? Well, it's a few things like having a high quality direct drive steering wheel that gives you a lot of feedback, a lot of feel. Then next you want to have really good pedals, gives you good braking feel and feedback, good throttle feel. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to get a turnkey package with somebody like CXC Simulations in this Motion Pro 2. So once you get into the sim, you want to make sure that your seating position is correct, and there's a couple different things you want to pay attention to once you sit down. So first thing, you want to adjust the pedals to where you have a nice bend in your knee and you're able to get full extension, full brake pressure, full throttle, and clutch usage without your legs being extended too far. You want your arms to be able to reach the wheel. I kind of measure it by putting my arms straight out, making sure my wrists break over the wheel. This is actually maybe a little too close for me. I'll push it a little further away. There we go. And then just making sure that you have full range of motion on the wheel from lock to lock. Clutch, brake, and throttle, all appropriate with a little bit of bend in the knee, and I'm ready to go. All right, so up next, if you're on a CXC Motion Pro 2 or any other sim with the seatbelt tensioner, make sure your seatbelts are nice and tight and adjusted correctly, just like in the real race car. Tighten them down, shoulder belts, lap belts, and good to go. So next up, if you're on a sim with motion adjustability, make sure that it's adjusted correctly for your preferences. Second, we've got brake pressure. Again, adjust to your taste. And finally, the vibration setting. Adjust to your taste and your preference settings. What you may like may not work for your friend, and vice versa. So I recommend taking a few minutes to play with these, test out a few different settings, and find what works for you. Next up, choose a steering wheel. Make sure it's the one appropriate for the car you're driving in the sim. If you're on a CXC sim and you want to share your data and your telemetry with your teammates or with your sim coach, all you need to do is push this VB Sim button right here. Next up, before you jump into a session in iRacing, you want to set the track conditions and the weather. You have a few different things you can play with here, like humidity, temperature, wind speed, time of day, and starting track state. One way to do it is also to set the track state and weather to be completely static so that it doesn't change throughout the session. Now, this isn't natural to how you would actually drive because obviously the weather and the track state changes throughout the day in real life. However, it's a good way to get a baseline for a car and a track that you've never driven before or that you haven't driven in a while. Once you've got a good baseline and you're kind of in the window, then I would go in and create weather conditions that are likely to match the weather conditions of the real life event that you plan on racing. So if you're going to be racing in the morning, set the weather conditions to match the time of day. And if you're going to be racing there in the summer, you want the temperature to be a little higher, those kinds of things. So you can create the environment that you want within iRacing before you go and drive. And if you find that it's not working for you, you can always jump out and make a change to those track conditions, but it's all doable within iRacing. The next thing to adjust is the force feedback strength. Now that will vary from car to car in real life, just as it'll vary in the sim. You can adjust it via the bar there in the force feedback settings on the menu. And you want to find something that matches the real life car based on whether it has power steering, adjustable power steering, or no power steering at all. And again, this is kind of to your taste and to your preference. And you can really make the wheel difficult to turn with more force feedback, or easier to turn to mimic power steering with a lower force feedback setting. So moving on to car setup. Now, we are racing the 488 GT3 Evo in iRacing because we don't have the Ferrari Challenge car specifically, so we have to try and do some things to this car to make it match or at least approach the feeling of a challenge car. Some of the things we can do are to adjust the brakes. So what we do is we dial the brake bias forward and we raise the ABS settings. We can also add some weight to the car in iRacing. On the top right there, you see weight penalty. You can add some weight to the 48 GT3. and that will affect the car's balance in the corners, and it will elongate the brake zones in the GT3 car to mimic more like what you have in the Challenge car. Unfortunately, we can't add horsepower to the GT3 car in iRacing. Obviously, the 488 Challenge car has quite a bit of horsepower, but we're really trying to mimic the brake feel and the handling feel. So we like to add weight. We like to adjust the brake pressure settings on the bias and the ABS by increasing those with a lot of front bias and some extra ABS settings. We can also do things like raise the car up a bit, do some things to take away some of the grip in the corners by raising the ride height, softening the spring rates, things like that. So again, we're trying to mimic more of what the 48 Challenge car feels like by detuning the 48 GT3 a bit and making the braking feel and the handling mimic more like what the Challenge car is like. Now, again, it's a bit of a compromise here, but there are some things we can do. And we've created a setup that we think really gets pretty close. And so if you want to download that, the link is in the description below. For this week's lesson, we are at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, the Formula One track in Montreal, Canada. Ferrari Challenge comes here for a support race every year. It's kind of a historic thing that Ferrari Challenge has always done. So it's one of the best events on the Ferrari Challenge calendar. Tons of Formula One fans, one of the best tracks on the calendar as well. I'm going to leave pit lane here and do a bit of a slow drive, kind of a track walk to show you some of the features of this track. So as you blend out of pit lane here, really important to stay left of this white line because you enter right in the middle of turn 1. Coming out onto the track here, be mindful of blending of traffic, and we'll accelerate up towards turn 2 here. Going nice and slow. I want to show you a few things. Reference points wise here, we've got off to the left, we've got some number boards for your brake reference markers on the left side, indicating where the brake references are for turn 2 here. The brake reference when you're at speed is going to be somewhere around the 2 board. We'll talk about that more when I'm driving at speed. But you do have a bailout zone straight ahead. And then as you can see already, I'm going to stop here. I'm already turned in for the corner. And you still can't see through it. It's kind of a blind entry. That's what makes this track so unique and so fun. It's a street circuit. It's only used once a year. It's not a traditional track. It doesn't have a whole lot of runoff. And you got to get really close to the walls, use as much curb as possible too. So definitely a high risk, high reward type of track. Now, apex of turn 1, cut as much curb as you can to optimize the line through here, and then it's a quick transition back to the left. And then you got to be really careful on the exit here because as you can see, the exit is asphalt, about 3 feet of curb, and then directly into a concrete wall right there at the exit. That's what makes this track so much fun is that the margins are so tight. So you want to exit using every inch of curb as possible without hitting the wall. Coming up towards turn 4 and 5 here, this will be flat out once the tires are warm, but again, another blind corner. Can't really see through here. You're going to be probably grabbing 4th gear, maybe even 5th gear before you get to the brakes. It's really critical that you get tight as you can to the wall on the right side here. Now, as you start to come through the corner here, what comes into view, you've got some advertising banners that go up above, and now you can start to see the corner. On the left side, you've got the orange painted on the guardrail there. That's a cutout area. If you have an issue, you can use that, but you can also use that as a reference point. Also off to the right side here, you're going to be struggling to kind of get the car back to the right as you carry speed through the previous corner. One of the other reference points for braking here is off to the right side. You can see right where the concrete wall ends and just becomes guardrail. That's a good reference point for your brakes right there. Now, you really want to open up this corner here, brake late, turn in late. It's tempting to turn in early and use all of that curb, but you don't want to turn in too early because the exit is super important here. So using the curb at the entry there, but then getting it transitioned back to the right and getting on throttle nice and early here. And you may want to even short shift just to help keep the traction nice on the way out. And again, you've got asphalt, curb, and the wall is right there. So now we're accelerating down towards the next chicane. And up above the chicane here, we're going to have a bridge. It's a walkover bridge. It's where people walk over the track to get from the city into the racetrack. Again, this is a park for most of the year, so it's in a really unique setting. Now, as you approach this bridge, you're going to drive underneath it, and right about the two board, which is right there on the bridge, this is going to be our brake point. Right as we get to where we can get the nose of the car under the bridge, we're going to want to hit the brakes pretty hard. Go from 5th gear or 6th, depending on how good of a run you got out of the previous corner, down a couple gears to 3rd. Straight ahead here, you've got a big gravel runoff area, and you want to turn in 3rd gear, use as much of the inside curb there as possible without upsetting the car. And then again, a quick transition back to the left. You've got a lot of these types of like right-left, similar types of corners here at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. And then again, tracking out right to the wall. Now we've got a moment to take a breath here as we upshift, getting ready for the slowest corner on the racetrack coming up ahead. We'll go from 5th gear, maybe even 6th gear, again, depending on your run. And we want to find a good brake point into the hairpin slowest corner, probably 1st gear, maybe 2nd gear in the challenge car. I'm going to back up here just a moment, just to show you the brake reference point here. And this is pretty true to reality. Off to the left, you've got grass, and then you've got this piece of pavement, and then more grass. So generally you're going to be braking somewhere about where this piece of pavement starts in the real race car. In the sim, you might be able to brake just a little bit later, but we've got to find a good brake reference point here where we can get the car slowed down in time for the hairpin. Do a nice late turn in here, hit our late apex, and it's all about how early can we get the full throttle down here and track out and accelerate hard all the way down this long straightaway into a great passing zone, final set of corners here. So accelerate up. In the challenge car, you might get up to as much as 160, 170 miles an hour. I'm going to slow down again here just to show you the reference points as we approach the final corner at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Again, there's a big advertising banner that goes up ahead. You drive underneath it. It's actually a pedestrian bridge. And then you've got some brake markers off to the left, 5, 4. As you come under the pedestrian bridge there, you want to get ready to brake. So you brake somewhere about the start of the bridge, maybe even just beyond the bridge, and you'll go down from 6th gear down to 4th, probably down to 3rd gear as well. This is also your pit lane entrance. So if you're coming into pit lane, you'll go straight here rather than turning. But right when you get to about the 1 board here, you start to bend it in. And again, you've got a really quick chicane here where you use as much curb as possible. You use more of the first curb than the second curb. And tracking out, again, right towards the wall. This is the Wall of Champions here. It's caught out many of the champion Formula One drivers over the years. Want to make sure that we don't fall victim to the Wall of Champions. Get on the throttle nice and early. Up a few gears and get ready for turn 1. Turn 1 braking point here as well is going to be right about at the 2.5 board. Also right about where this second paved marker is, because again, you've got grass pavement. So marker wise, that's what I tend to use. As we get into the brake zone for turn 1 here, we'll accelerate towards the apex just to show you this, because we came out of pit lane here. We didn't see this corner yet. We can cut a lot of this apex here, carry a lot of entry speed, almost brake all the way past the apex there, down a couple gears, hug the apex for a long time here, and then really manage the throttle on the way out, maybe even short shift. So that's a slow lap there, looking at some of the reference points at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Now let's go for a quick lap. All right, here we go. Starting a flying lap at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, braking as late as possible, making sure we get a good run out of the final corner, use a little curb on the gas hard. Here we go, starting our first flying lap at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Setting up for turn 1, starting nice and wide here as we come under the start-finish line, braking late and hard at that second access road, carrying a lot of speed through the first apex, hugging the curb there, squeezing on the throttle, trying not to overwhelm the rear tires. A little bit of a short shift there. Now getting ready for the blind. First set of corners here, up on the curb at the apex, cars hopping around, tracking out all the way to the wall, up to 4th gear, up to 5th gear, hug the wall, try and stay flat out. Ooh, little lift there. Okay, brake late, apex late here because I'm trying to get on the throttle nice and early. Again, I've got a short shift there just to manage the rear tires. All right, first moment to take a breath here. Now I got to think about the brake zone. Right before we get to the bridge, on the brakes nice and hard, down a couple gears, turn it in, a little bit of understeer there. I think I braked a little too late that time. Tracking out to the wall once again, getting ready for the slowest corner on the track, the hairpin here. Up to 5th, on the brakes hard, down all the way to 1st gear in this car, trailing the brake, squeezing on the gas, trying not to overwhelm the rear tires. Okay, long straightaway here into the final corner. Take a breath, really try and nail the brake point here just beyond the pedestrian bridge, the Dodge sign there. Here we go, full throttle, just past the bridge, on the brakes, 3rd gear. 3rd gear meant to be through there. A little bit of that first curb, now let's go one more lap here. Brake a little bit later this time into turn 1. Carry the brake all the way to the apex. A little bit of throttle, and then brake again, really managing the steering and throttle input there. Up to 4th gear, we're gonna carry 3rd gear, this time through turn 3 there, hitting the curb, on the gas full throttle, up to 4th, up to 5th, stay flat, brake nice and late here, apex nice and late, don't use too much of that curb, we don't want to upset the rear tires here, really managing all the way out. That one's tough. Okay, got to get the brake point right here, brake a little bit earlier this time. I'm gonna roll 3rd gear, 6, 5, 4, 3, there we go, that one's tough. Okay, one more time here, being really precise with the brake point for the hairpin. On the brakes, nice and hard, full ABS, downshifting the whole way, late turn and late apex, super patient right here, not to overwhelm the rear tires. And first moment to take a breath. Okay, best passing zone coming up here, so we want to get set up, carry good speed out of that final corner. We're gonna brake a little bit later here, down to 3rd gear, carry the speed, big curb at the first apex, not so much curb at the second apex, all the way out to the wall of champions. And that's another flying lap here at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Really fast, tricky, technical track, not a lot of room for error, but super fun, one of my favorites of the whole year. All right, so some final thoughts here about Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. This race is it's a classic. It's a Formula One track, so there's gonna be tons of fans, not a lot of track time. Simulator work beforehand is going to be really important. We've got such a technical, high-risk type of racetrack that the more prepared you can be before you show up, the better. I think if you spend a lot of laps really working on the nuances of this track, a lot of the corners look very similar and they feel very similar, where you've got a lot of right-left combinations where you got to transition the car quickly from one direction to the other. I think if you practice that and practice really getting your eyes up and trusting the reference points that you can learn by using the simulator and looking at video, you'll be way ahead of the game compared to the people who don't have the experience of using the simulator or getting some practice laps in before you get there. So again, one of the most fun, most technical, most challenging tracks in terms of the risk you have to take here to find the lap time. The curbs are big, the walls are close, such a fun track. Spend some extra time on the simulator getting ready for it. You'll be glad you did.